Hello, good evening everyone. Welcome to EduTap. I hope you all are doing well. Can you please confirm if my voice is audible or not? Just confirm my voice if I'm audible to all of you. Yes, the voice is fine. Okay. So now let us begin with the session, and in this session, of course, what we do, this is Perspective 360 degree, where we do current affair based answer writing practice in a detailed and structured manner. And if you're somebody who's preparing for exams like RBI, NABARD, etc., then here we are going to do answer writing practice. You can join us, you can write your answers in the comment box, and your answers will be getting evaluated free of cost. Fine. So this is the agenda of this whole initiative or this whole series. Now let us talk about today's topic, which was there in the news last month, which is regarding the Banking Laws Amendment Bill 2024. Now we all know that banking laws are very important as far as your examination is concerned, though not all the provisions are important, but the context with respect to your syllabus is very relevant as far as this topic is concerned. Fine. So because if you see the syllabus, in your syllabus very specifically it is mentioned that if you open your finance syllabus, very specifically they have mentioned this topic, this theme of banking system in India. And that is the reason why this topic is important, and that is why we are covering it as a part of this session. I hope it is clear to you that why we are covering this topic as a part of this whole session. Fine, agenda is clear to you. Now let us move on to the next part. But before addressing today's question of Perspective 360 degree, there is one type of advice that I would like to give you, that when you write your answers in the comment box, please do write the time also that you have taken in order to write that answer, because it will help you to compare your answers in a better manner with the answers of the fellow aspirants. So do write your answer also. For example, you have taken 1 hour, so honestly write that I have taken 1 hour, sir, and that's fine. You are a beginner, you are just practicing, so it's fine even if you're taking 1 hour for an 18 minutes answer. Fine. So 1 hour, 2 hour, whatever time you have taken, just write it with your answer in the comment box, so that just to keep that accountability. Now let us move on to the next part. Let us talk about the Banking Laws Amendment Bill 2024, and let us see the important provisions that has been brought by the government. Fine. So this bill was introduced in the Lok Sabha in the month of November, and in the month of December it was passed. So let us see what are the different important provisions that are there with respect to this bill. The first and the foremost thing is that what are the different type of provisions that this bill aims to amend. So basically it has targeted certain type of provisions. For example, the RBI Act 1934. We know what is RBI Act 1934. Basically this act talks about establishment of RBI. Establishment of RBI as the Central Bank of India. Fine, that is the first thing. If you talk about the Banking Regulation Act 1949, what is the purpose of this act? Basically it governs the functioning of different type of commercial banks that are there in our country, be it related to their governance or be it related to their licensing. That is regulated by Banking Regulation Act. Now we have separate act, which is State Bank of India 1955. Now you would be thinking that State Bank of India is also a type of commercial bank. So why there is a separate legislation for it? The reason being that the State Bank of India was formed in the pre-independence period. And during that period, there were 3 presidency banks, which were Bank of Odisha, Bank of Bengal, and Bank of Madras. Fine. Sorry, it was not Odisha, it was Bombay. So Bank of Bombay, Bank of Bengal, and Bank of Madras. Now these 3 banks were merged into Imperial Bank of India by the Britishers. And later on what happened? Later on, this basically Imperial Bank of India was converted into what? It was converted into the State Bank of India. And later on, it was nationalized in the year 1955. It was nationalized in the year 1955 by the government. So the same rules, same regulations, they were continued, they were amended. And that is why traditionally there was a separate legislation through which the State Bank of India was nationalized as a part of our country. Fine. That is why we have a separate amendment with respect to it, because of its historical belonging. Fine. Now let us talk about the next 2 points. Basically, these are the next two, I would say, act that have been amended as a part of it. The Banking Companies Act 1970 and the Banking Companies Act 1980. Now, these were the acts under which, now if you talk about the 1970 Act, under it, major 14 private bank 14 private banks were nationalized in our country, whereas in the 1980 Act, six additional banks were also privatized. They were nationalized. So earlier they were private, both of them. 14 in the first phase, 14 banks, and then the 6 banks, they were nationalized. Fine, and it was done under the Indira Gandhi government. Fine, Mrs. Indira Gandhi, she was the prime minister at that time. So I hope it is clear to you. Now these are the acts on which the government has brought this amendment. Now let us talk about the important amendments that have been mentioned. So the first amendment is related to the tenure of directors of cooperative banks. We all know about cooperative banks. Fine, I hope the basics are clear to you. If they are not, please read about cooperative banks, that how they are formed, how they get the license, what is the regulatory framework, also sort of things regarding the cooperative banks. Fine. So this specific amendment is with respect to the cooperative banks. And what does this amendment say? So basically the current rule was that, by current rule I mean the rule that was there before the amendment. Fine. The current rule was that the directors of the cooperative bank, of a certain type of cooperative bank, except the chairman and the whole time director, fine, they can hold office for a maximum of 8 consecutive years. That was a rule before the amendment. That is, the tenure is of 8 consecutive years. But now what has been changed? As per the amendment, this tenure is extended to 10 years. Fine. So what it will do basically, when the tenure of the cooperative banks directors will be extended, this will allow the stability in the management of the cooperative banks, and it will allow the experienced directors to continue for a longer period. So that is the reason why this tenure has been extended. That is the intention behind it. I hope it is clear to you that this provision is specifically with respect to the cooperative banks. I hope the point is clear. Now the next point is regarding the prohibition on common directors in cooperative bank. Now this is also another important major amendment that has been brought with respect to cooperative banks. Now if we talk about the pre-amendment rule, so the rule says that the director of a bank cannot serve on the board of another bank. That is, if there is a director who is a director of a certain bank, he cannot serve on the board of another bank. Why is it so? So that there is no scope of conflict of interest. But earlier there was a certain type of exception with respect to it. What was this exception? Exception was related to the directors that are appointed by the RBI. They are allowed to be the director of a certain bank. At the same time, they were also allowed to be the part of the board of another bank. Now what is the change that the amendment has brought? Amendment has extended the coverage of this exceptional rule. Now what another exception has been brought? Now the exception has been brought with respect to the directors of the central cooperative banks. We know that cooperative banks is a very sensitive sector, because we know that they are member owned banks that basically are not profit oriented. They basically prioritize the members over the profitization. Fine, we all know how they work in the most democratic manner. Also different type of features that are associated with the cooperative banks. So in order to govern them in a better manner, so what basically they have done, they have now added another exemption which says that the directors of the central cooperative banks, they are allowed to serve on the boards of state cooperative banks. Fine. So if there is a director who is there at the central cooperative banks, he is allowed to serve at the board of the state cooperative banks also. Why is it so? Because of course the person who is going to be the director of a central cooperative banks, he is going to be an experienced person who would be having a lot of experience. Fine. So what he will do, he will use his skills, he will use his knowledge as a contribution for the governance of that state cooperative banks also, and that's how the governance can be improved with the input of such type of persons. Fine. And that is why we have created the exception with respect to the governance of the cooperative banks. Fine. So the central cooperative bank director can be the board member of the state cooperative banks. I hope it is clear to you. The next is the substantial interest in a company. Now the pre-amendment rule says that a person is considered to have substantial interest if they hold shares worth rupees 5 lakh or 10% of the paid up capital. So what is paid up capital? There are two types of capitals. The first is the authorized capital and the second is the paid up capital. Authorized capital means the amount of money that you are allowed to raise, the amount of money that a company is allowed to raise. Paid up capital is something that the actual amount of money that the company is able to raise out of the authorized capital. Let us say authorized capital is 100 करोड़, फाइन 100 करोड़ कि 100 करोड़ आप रेस कर सकते हो मार्केट से, बट कंपनी ने रेस कितना किया? मिनिमम लेट अस से 60 करोड़ उसने रेस कर लिया. सो 100 करोड़ इज व्हाट? इट इज द ऑथराइज्ड कैपिटल दैट इज ऑथराइज्ड टू अ कंपनी. 60 करोड़ मींस द पेड अप कैपिटल दैट इट हैज एक्चुअली यूज्ड, दैट इट हैज एक्चुअली रेज्ड. फाइन. So if you talk about the current rule, it says that a person including his spouse and minor child is considered to have substantial interest if they hold shares of worth rupees 5 lakh or 10% of the paid up capital of a company. Now, how does it make a difference? Now, the thing is that when you have a substantial interest in a company, how do we define substantial interest? Just here, it is written in front of you. It means you have more than rupees 5 lakh or 10% of the paid up capital. Fine. Now, when you have a substantial interest in a company, what is going to happen? You are going to be regulated under the stricter regulations. Fine. You are going to get governed under stricter regulations, which a lot of people do not want to. And that is what they do when they see that somewhere they are holding the shares of around 8% of the paid up capital, then they will stop over there. They would extend it to 10% of the paid up capital intentionally, because they know that if they will do that, then their ownership will come under the substantial interest criteria and they will be strictly regulated by the authorities, which is something that a lot of people do not want. So this is, I would say, was a restrictive, I would say, constraint that was associated regarding the ownership of the companies. So now what the government has done, the government has I would say brought the amendment with respect to it. Now the government has raised the holding of share which shall be categorized as the substantial interest. So what the government has done, the threshold for substantial interest is increased to 2 crore rupees. Earlier it was worth rupees 5 lakh, now it has been increased to 2 crore rupees, and the central government has the power to alter this amount through a notification. Fine. So it has been raised. Why is it raised? So that more and more people can come and they do not hesitate from doing the investment. Fine. So that they do not hesitate from doing the investment, and larger investment can be done without worrying with respect to the substantial interest. So that is something that I would say would be the impact of this rule, the primary impact of this rule. The next is what? The next is remuneration of auditors. Now there has been an amendment with respect to remunerations also. So the current rule was that the remuneration of a bank auditor is determined by RBI in consultation with the central government. That was the pre-amendment rule. Now what is the change that has been brought? The change is that banks are now empowered to decide the remuneration for the auditors independently. Now how does it make a difference? So basically when the banks will be allowed to decide the remuneration, the salary or also type of things on their own, it will give more freedom to the bank. More freedom to the bank, and what they can do, they can decide the remuneration based on their need, the need of the bank, and also the work that is required by the auditor. So based on these factors, apart from that, it will allow the banks to be more independent in managing their finances. Fine. It will give more independence to the banks. Fine. So that is what this remuneration of auditors amendment aims to provide. I hope it is clear to you. Now let us look at the next amendment. The next amendment is regarding the settlement of unclaimed amounts. Now let us see, this is the last point. So let us see what it is all about. So the current rule says that the unclaimed dividends are transferred to an unclaimed unclaimed dividend account and then to the IEPF after 7 years. Now first of all, let us try to understand what is unclaimed dividends. Unclaimed dividends are nothing but basically, dividends are what? They are a percentage of the profit that the company shares with its shareholders. Fine. So thing is that when the company shares the dividend with the shareholders, a lot of time what happens is that these dividends stay unclaimed, which means basically the shareholder is not able to avail the benefit of the shareholder. What could be the reason behind that? There could be multiple reasons. For example, the lack of awareness from the side of the shareholders that the dividend has been announced. I have to claim for the dividends. I have to take the profit. Sometimes the shareholders are not aware. Sometimes there can be errors from the side of the company also. Maybe the dividend that was supposed to be given to a shareholder, it has been transferred to someone else. That could be also scope of error, that some kind of technical error. So because of different kind of reasons, some proportion of dividends, they stay unclaimed or unpaid. Fine. Now basically the rule says that if there is a certain type of dividend that stays unclaimed for 7 years, fine, I'm repeating, if there is a certain type of unclaimed dividend that stays unclaimed for the 7 years, then what will happen? This unclaimed dividend will be transferred to a special account, which is unclaimed dividend account, and then to the Investor Education and Protection Fund, IEPF. Now imagine what could be the reason behind it. Why they have transferred this unclaimed dividend to a special or a separate account? The first reason is that so that this dividend that is unclaimed, it means nobody is the owner of this dividend. It was supposed to be given to the shareholder. Shareholder has not claimed it. It has been released by the company. Now what will happen? It will be sent to IEPF. So basically, since it is unclaimed, it is prone to get misuse. So in order to avoid this misuse, we have this dedicated fund, so that in an organized manner, whatever the unclaimed dividends are, we can store them at one place. The second thing is that if tomorrow the investor comes and he says that I forgot to, I would say, claim my unclaimed dividends, so please send it to, please send the ownership of these unclaimed dividends to me. So what the authorities are going to say, first you have to prove that these unclaimed dividends belong to you. So if the investor is able to prove that, then yes, the unclaimed dividends will be sent to that certain type of investor. Otherwise, what will happen? They will stay in the IEPF fund only. Fine. So that is the idea. Now, what is the rule? What is the amendment that has been brought with respect to it? The amendment is that now the shares with unclaimed dividends, so this provision is going to get same. Now the government has added additional factor also with respect to the unclaimed bonds also. Fine. So for example, if there is a certain type of bond, that now what do the bond provide? For the bonds, we get the interest. Fine. We get the interest in return. Now the same things happen in case of bond also. Some type of interest are unpaid or they are unclaimed. Fine. So what happens if they are unpaid for the next 7 years? What will happen? These bonds with unpaid interest, they will also be sent to this IEPF account only. So earlier only shares were there. The unclaimed, it was with respect to shares, that is regarding the dividend. Now it has been added the bonds also. Now the bonds have also been added as a part of this rule. So if there are unclaimed, there are bonds that are with unpaid interest, they will also be sent to IEPF. Fine. So that is the idea regarding it. And what is going to be the impact of it? The impact is that basically this help ensure that the unclaimed amounts are properly managed and people can claim refunds for their unclaimed shares or funds. Fine. Now if you want to know about IEPF, what is IEPF, what is the purpose of this, then IEPF is basically Investor Education Protection Fund, and it is a government established fund that serves two main purposes. What type of purpose? The first is the investor education. Fine. So as the name suggests, it is for investor education and protection fund. So the first role is the education. It focuses to promote the investor education and awareness regarding their rights and responsibilities. Fine. So that they do not get associated with any kind of fraudulent schemes, also sort of things. So what are their rights? What is their responsibilities? The investors are made aware about that. The second is the protection keyword. Protection is what? This is what just we have discussed. So regarding the protection of unclaimed amounts. So it also serves as a mechanism to safeguard the interest of investors by receiving and managing unclaimed amounts. I hope all the important provisions are pretty much clear to you. Now let us move on to the next part. The next part is the question for today. Discuss the key issues in the governance of banking system in India, suggest solutions. So this is our expected question for today, and if you're somebody who is new to this Perspective 360, let me tell you that you have to write the answer of this question in the comment box within 48 hours. Fine. And it will be evaluated by our team. So very soon I'm going to discuss all the points for this answer in a comprehensive manner. You just have to write the answer of this under the video in the comment box. Our team will evaluate it, and you can also compare your answers with the fellow aspirants. Fine. Now let us go through the answer of this question. So first of all, let us focus on the introduction part. So how you can write a short introduction, since the question is asking about the key issues and the solution. So keeping in mind that part, we can frame such type of introduction like: India's banking system has demonstrated resilience in recent years, with gross NPA ratios declining to a 13-year low of 2.5% by September 2024. तो अभी तक तो ये आपको याद भी हो चुका होगा, क्योंकि यही हमने फाइनेंशियल स्टेबिलिटी रिपोर्ट में भी देखा था और यही रिपोर्ट्स ऑन ट्रेंड्स एंड बैंकिंग में भी देखा था. फाइन. तो दो रिपोर्ट्स में हम ये डेटा देख चुके हैं, तो आपको पता लग गया होगा कि जीएनपीए 13-year low आया. सो दिस इज अ healthy side. This is a good factor as far as the banking system is concerned. But since the question is asking about issues, so what we can write? So however, challenges persist, including rising banking frauds with 18,461 cases amounting to 21,367 crore reported in first half of 2024. So this is a challenge. You can write some other data also. मुझे पता है ये डेटा याद रखना मुश्किल होगा, तो आप कुछ और डेटा याद रख लो, कुछ परसेंटेज वाला डेटा याद रख लो, क्योंकि परसेंटेज वाला जो डेटा होता है वो याद रखना आसान होता है. तो चाहे कोई एनपीए से डेटा, एनपीए से तो नहीं क्योंकि एनपीए की हमने तारीफ कर दी, तो कोई और आपको डेटा मिले जो परसेंटेज में हो, जो याद रखने में आसानी हो और उसको मल्टीपल जगह आप यूज कर सको, तो उस डेटा को कोशिश करो यहाँ पे रिप्लेस करने की. ये थोड़ा याद रखना मुश्किल है, ठीक है. तो अगर रख सकते हो याद, अच्छी बात है. अगर मैं आपकी जगह होता तो इसे जरूर रिप्लेस करता. सो यू मस्ट राइट दिस टाइप ऑफ इंट्रोडक्शन कि पहले थोड़ी हमने पॉजिटिव साइड दिखा दी, बट सिंस द क्वेश्चन इज टॉकिंग अबाउट द इश्यूज, देन इन द सेकंड line we are mentioning the some sort of negative side of the coin. Fine. Now what we can write, a connecting line, a small connecting line, that these ongoing issues highlight the need for continued reforms and improvements in the banking sector. Now after this, what we are going to write, that what are those issues, and then what we will write in the second part of the body, what are the reforms that we can bring. Fine. This is what the connecting line means. It gives a small snapshot of the answer. Now let us try to talk about it, the issues that are there in the governance of the banking system in India. So the first issue is regarding the increase in the bank frauds. Fine. Now, according to RBI report on trends and progress of banking in India, banking frauds amounted to 21,367 crore. Fine. And in 18,461 cases. So this is something that has been highlighted as a part of report on trends and progress. Then the next is that these frauds contribute to different type of risk. For example, whenever a fraud happens, what does it lead to? It leads to the reputational loss of the bank. But before reputation, what comes? The interest of those people who have deposited their money in the bank account. So it leads to a lot of, I would say, instability in the banking system because of the risk, because of the erosion of the customer confidence, also sort of things. A good example can be PNB scam that happened in 2018. So we have been witnessing the increase in the banking frauds. So at the small scale also and at the large scale also, the scams are also happening with the customers because of the different type of risks that are associated with the technology. Apart from that, the big banking frauds are also happening because of the operational issues, the structural issues, and also questions the morality of the banking staff, which basically, for example, in case of PNB scam, we have seen that how the banking staff, how the banking administration was that are there at the high authorities, they were involved in that scam, in that overall scam. So that could be a good example of that. So the increase in the banking frauds is basically the first point regarding these issues. The second is the governance and autonomy of public sector banks. Now when we talk about the governance and the autonomy of public sector banks, there has been problem of the overlapping of functions. What type of problem? For example, we know that when we talk about public sector banks, fine, who is the primary regulator of public sector banks? It is the RBI. RBI is the primary regulator of the banks. Now when we talk about SEBI, does SEBI regulate the bank primarily? The answer is no. But does SEBI contribute to the regulation of the bank? The answer is yes. How? Because those banking companies who are listed on the stock exchange, they have to abide by the rules that have been framed by SEBI. Fine. So whatever rules that these banking companies that are listed on the stock exchange, they have to abide by these rules. So for example, if they want to sell their securities, the sale of securities, that is something a part of it. Then apart from that, they need to maintain transparency. Fine. Transparency and other kind of norms that have been associated with the regulatory framework of SEBI, which basically indirectly governs the bank. Apart from that, if we talk about IRDAI also, now IRDAI, we know it is for the insurance sector. Now don't bank provide the insurance schemes, the insurance policies, the insurance services? The answer is yes. And since banks are also involved in the insurance business, IRDAI is somebody who is going to regulate them. So don't you think that there is some kind of overlapping with respect to the authorities? There can be a scope of conflict with respect to the decision making? The answer is yes. It has been happening. So you can see that PSB faced significant governance challenges, including lack of autonomy in decision making. Apart from that, there is inefficiency arise from the interference by government in board appointments and also the operational matters. Fine. Apart from that, PSBs regulate a dual control system also. How does a dual control system is there? For example, if you talk about any kind of bank, the bank is regulated by whom? The primary regulator is the RBI. RBI is the regulator of that bank. But the ownership of the bank is with whom? Especially if it is the public sector banks. So since it is public sector banks, so the majority of the ownership is going to be with the government. Then don't you think that the government is going to take decision making regarding the policy policy-based decision making. Don't you think the government is going to take decision regarding the administration? The answer is yes. So such kind of, I would say, conflict is also witnessed with respect to the governance, and also yes, the autonomy conflict is also there, and that is the reason, since the autonomy conflict is there, and that is the reason this amendment, do you remember this amendment, the remuneration, that is the reason why we have decided that the banks are now, they will be deciding the remuneration of their auditors. That is the reason, because we know that autonomy is somewhere compromised, and government is trying their best so that banks can also take some type of decisions on their own, and at the same time we need to balance the respect, because too much power is also not good, because then the banks will get prone to the misuse of that power. So at the same time the regulatory control is also maintained, but simultaneously we are also trying to give some kind of freedom to the banks. So this is basically the governance challenge. फाइन. नाउ द थर्ड इज द रेगुलेटरी गैप्स एंड एम्बिग्यूटी. ये वाला पॉइंट मैंने आपको यहीं पर समझा दिया. एक्चुअली मुझे यहां बोलना चाहिए था, बट मैंने पहले ही बता दिया आपको रिगार्डिंग द सेबी एंड आरबीआई एंड आईएडीआई व्हाट टाइप ऑफ ओवरलैपिंग थिंग्स आर देयर. सो लेट अस जस्ट गो थ्रू द स्लाइड्स बिकॉज वी हैव ऑलरेडी कवर्ड इट. सो द कोएग्जिस्टेंस ऑफ मल्टीपल रेगुलेटरी बॉडीज, फॉर एग्जांपल द आरबीआई, सेबी, आईआरडीआई, CCI, which is Competition Commission of India, and others, has resulted in overlapping authorities and regulatory ambiguities. Apart from that, the cooperative sector, it also suffers from weak regulation due to dual control between the RBI as well as the state regulators. So when we talk about the cooperative banks, very especially if we talk about the rural cooperative banks, you know, because in the rural cooperative banks, the RBI is there. Fine. The NABARD somewhere also plays a supervisory role. Fine. Then we have the state registrar also, which along with the state government, they try to regulate this rural cooperative bank sector, very specifically primary agriculture cooperative society. You must have heard about it. Fine. So thing is that RBI regulates the financial aspects, but this state registrars, they basically deal with the registration and their compliance. So also there is some kind of, I would say, dual control with respect to this cooperative banking sector, and that also leads to different kind of conflicts and also the ambiguity with respect to decision making. I hope this is also clear. Now okay, so there is some data that we have written. Let us read this also. So that in 2023 there were closures of 17 cooperative banks and a record number of license cancellations by RBI. So you can see that how we are facing so much of inefficiencies with respect to the cooperative banks, which is an important issue. What is next? Next is the structural issues. So there are structural issues also. So basically, if we talk about the structural issues, a very important structural issues is with respect to the growth in the deposits. So we know that deposits play very important role in the banks, because when the banks accept the deposits, they use a certain portion of the deposit in order to lend the money. Fine. Now imagine if the deposit growth is going down. Do you think bank would be able to lend a huge amount of money in a risk friendly manner? In a risk free manner? The answer is no. Fine. So at one side the lending is important, because with lending what happens, banks are able to generate profit with the help of interest. But at the same time, no doubt that deposits are also important, because if people will not deposit their money, what is going to happen? The banks will face some kind of liquidity constraints. Fine. And when the banks will face liquidity constraint, what will happen? The interest rate that they are going to charge from lending, that is also going to get increased. That will be the indirect impact of that. Fine. In order to compensate their profit. So that is what could be the consequence of the low deposit growth. So what is going to happen in this case? Basically, what we have been witnessing that the credit growth has surpassed by the deposit growth. Fine. So the credit growth has been surpassed by deposit growth due to shifts in the household savings from traditional deposits to mutual fund, insurance and pension schemes. So what people are basically doing, instead of doing the savings in the bank, they are preferring to invest their money in the other platforms like the mutual funds, the insurance and the pension scheme. And why is it so? Because these mutual funds, these type of platform, they provide better interest, or I should say the better returns. Apart from that, many people aim to diversify their investment. That could be another reason. Then apart from that, a lot of mutual fund, a lot of such kind of investments, they also provide different kind of tax incentives. Fine. So टैक्स इंसेंटिव्स की वजह से भी बहुत लोग इन्वेस्ट करते हैं. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, यू मस्ट हैव हर्ड अबाउट ELSS scheme. Fine. So equity linked savings scheme, but that basically help you with the taxation benefits. So a lot of people invest in that scheme because of such type of benefit. So what people are doing, instead of doing the traditional bank deposits like fixed deposit, also sort of things, they have started investing in mutual fund, insurance and pension scheme, which has basically affected the efficiency. Fine, regarding the growth. The next is that this shift has led to structural liquidity issues. Just now I explained you that how liquidity issues can arise and how they can influence the economy with the rise of interest rate. Fine, and apart from that, the political factors are also there. For example, the loan disbursements, the debt waivers by the government. Election में debt waivers announce कर देते हैं, which becomes problematic in the long run and also brings wrong habit in the minds of the individuals कि नई सरकार आएगी, उससे डिमांड करेंगे कि हमारा डेट वेव कर दो, तो उससे हमें फायदा हो जाएगा. तो they get into this wrong habit and wrong credit culture that is there. Fine, so which basically at the end of the day impact the balance sheet of the banks. So this is another important issue. What is the next issue? This is very much general, very much easy. इसमें कुछ ज्यादा बोलने वाला है नहीं. साइबर सिक्योरिटी एंड आईटी रिस्क. ये तो जहां भी टेक्नोलॉजी दिख जाए आपको वहां इस पॉइंट को लिख देना आंसर में, ठीक है. तो ये हर जगह आ जाता है. सो साइबर सिक्योरिटी एंड आईटी रिस्क आर ऑलवेज देयर बिकॉज द राइज इज साइबर अटैक्स टारगेटिंग banks and financial institutions have underscored the need for enhanced IT governance and resilience. Additionally, digital frauds are also happening. Then the misuse of mule accounts, fine, they are becoming more prevalent, posing a great threat to the banking system. So I hope it is clear to you. Now let us move on to the next part, that what could be the solutions of these problems. The first solution could be that we need to enhance the autonomy of public sector banks. They are very much strictly regulated. एक तरफ से RBI आ रहा है रेगुलेशन के लिए, दूसरी तरफ से डिसीजंस गवर्नमेंट भी ले रही है. What about the autonomy of the bank? So what we need to do, the government can establish a bank investment company. Now what is the concept of this bank investment company as recommended by PJ Naik committee? Basically the bank investment company has been proposed to be established, and how it should be established? It should be established as a separate entity. Separate from what? Separate from the government. Because we know that government interferes a lot when it comes to the functioning of the bank, when it comes to decision making of the bank. So what this bank investment company will do, it will be established as a separate company, and it will take decisions in an independent manner with respect to the functionings of the bank, with respect to policy making, with respect to the other type of administrative decision. So it can do that. Fine. So it will be a separate identity to manage the government stake in the public sector banks. Fine. So it is going to manage the stake that is held by the government in the public sector bank in order to reduce the interference of the government. Fine. So that will give, I would say, better autonomy to this public sector banks. The next is the incentives linked to performance. This is again a recommendation by PJ Naik committee. You can please note down this point somewhere, because the name of the committees has also been mentioned. I would say this is a good source of value addition. Fine. आप अपने आंसर में ऐसे PJ Naik committee ये सब लिख के आओगे तो of course it is going to act as a marks booster in your answer. So please थोड़े से एक short notes बना लेना एक पेज पर. ज़्यादा लंबा लिखने की जरूरत नहीं है, बस लिख लेना ऐसे PJ Naik की क्या क्या recommendations है which you can learn, and कहीं पे भी banking sector से इश्यूज से क्वेश्चन आ जाए वहां पे ये सोल्यूशन आप लिख देना, ठीक है. इसको आई मीन मल्टीपल टाइम रिवाइज कर लेना. सो द सेकंड इज इंसेंटिव लिंक टू परफॉर्मेंस. सो वी आल्सो नीड टू लिंक द रेम्यूनरेशन ऑफ बैंक एग्जीक्यूटिव्स with respect to the performance of the bank. So if the bank is performing well, if the bank is showing profitability, so we can match the growth of the bank with the remuneration of the bank executives. So this way, this is going to provide them incentives, which is the performance linked incentives, and that will promote the better results also as far as the banking structure is concerned, as far as the banking decisions is concerned. The next is transparency and accountability. We need to promote transparency and accountability. That will, I don't think we need to explain this point, because it will help in better monitoring, better reporting, and will improve the our banking parameters and indicators. Fine. The next is the establish a robust whistleblower system. It is also very important, so that if there is a certain kind of fraudulent activity, what is going to happen? Somebody shall be there. Or if he has those guts, if he has that courage to stand against that corruption or against that fraudulent activity. So what the system should do? System to try to give a certain type of backup to the person. For example, we should try to hide the identity of that person who is acting as a whistleblower. Also sort of things. If you have watched that movie, not the movie but the web series, Scam 1992, which is on Harshad Mehta, over there you must have seen that when he was taking a lot of money from SBI, so there was a small official in the SBI who basically reported that incident, the activity, that is suspicious activity that is happening in the bank, to that media reporter. Fine. So who is that person? That person is a whistleblower. So don't you think that the rights of that whistleblower should be protected? He should have the courage. He should be free from any kind of fear, also sort of things, so that he can go and he can very honestly report whatever misuse or misincident is happening in the bank. So this could be an example of that. Fine. The next is the fifth point, the coordination of regulations. So we need to coordinate the regulatory bodies. So you can see how this point has been linked to this point number 3, which is the regulatory gaps. So since there are gaps, तो इसका opposite क्या हो जाएगा कि coordination increase करो. So that's how you write the solution, by linking them with the problems. Fine. So let us see. So we need to create better coordination between the different kind of regulatory bodies. For example, RBI, SEBI, RBI, for more effective decision making. Fine. So I hope it is clear to all of you. Last but not the least, we have the concluding statement. We need to strengthen the regulatory framework and address the operational vulnerabilities that will be crucial for sustaining the growth and stability. जैसा कि हम रोज बात करते हैं, ये क्या है? ये हमारा थीसिस है, क्वेश्चन में दिया हुआ, जो हमने एक रीफ्रेस कर दिया थोड़ी सी वैल्यू एडिशन और कीवर्ड्स के साथ. अब क्या लिखेंगे? कुछ सपोर्टिंग सेंटेंस लिख दो या फिर वे फॉरवर्ड लिख दो. क्या वे फॉरवर्ड हो सकता है? जो आज हमने इस सेशन में डिस्कस किया, विच इज द बैंकिंग लॉज अमेंडमेंट बिल 2024. सो द गवर्नमेंट रिसेंट इनिशिएटिव बैंकिंग लॉ अमेंडमेंट बिल which aims to streamline the regulatory process and enhance transparency is a step in the right direction towards fortifying the sector for future growth. So this by this the examiner will know that कि आपको current affair भी आता है and आप उसमें add कर रहे हो as a part of your conclusion, which is a good value addition for your answer. Fine. So this is how you can write your own version of conclusion in your own language. Try to attempt it, and that is it from my side. And लास्टली दिस इज द आंसर ब्लूप्रिंट. अब ब्लूप्रिंट अब मैं लास्ट में डिस्कस करूंगा, क्योंकि शुरू में हम मेन मुद्दे पे आने से पहले ही बहुत लंबा प्री डिस्कशन कर लेते हैं. तो लास्ट में ब्लूप्रिंट है, हाउ यू हैव टू स्ट्रक्चर योर आंसर. यू हैव टू राइट योर इंट्रोडक्शन, the body and the conclusion. Introduction, as I say, around 10% to 12% maximum, not more than that. Fine. The same rule is for the conclusion also. Then we have the body, where you will write the points using the headings, and the subheadings. Under the subheadings you will write your relevant points that you will try to substantiate using some form of data, the facts and the examples. So that is the idea. Apart from that, this is the question, the answer of which you have to write in the comment box. Fine. So that is it from my side. And apart from that, we have EduTap blogs also, where you can read our blogs, and on our website that will provide you informative articles regarding different type of competitive exams. Apart from that, you can go to our website also, and we offer different type of courses for RBI, NABARD, RBI, NPS, and so on, JAB, CAP, different type of competitive exam. You can go and see what those courses are offering, and if it suits you, you can go for the subscription also. So that is it from my side. So thank you so much. If you have any suggestion regarding how this initiative can be improved, please write in the comment box. Fine. Write in the comment box what could be the feedback or the suggestion, so that we can actually evolve this initiative. I really want to evolve this initiative so that we can integrate it with your preparation in the most efficient manner. So do give your suggestions that how we can evolve it, how we can make it better, and if possible, I will try my best to integrate it. Fine, I will try my best to incorporate it in the future sessions. So this is the question. Try to write the answer. Now let me see the chat box if there is any doubt. Yes, usually they are directed to accounts only, but then we are talking about the unclaimed dividends, not the normal dividends, not the ones that are claimed. We were talking about unclaimed dividends. Fine. Now I think you had written your doubt earlier. I hope now it is clear to you. Anyone else? Any other doubt, confusion? Fine. So I'm not able to see any questions, so I think there is no doubt. So now, with your permission, what I'm going to do, of course, I'm going to end the session. So goodbye and all the best.